Sandy Powell, everyone. It would take me our entire session to list all your accolades, but newly appointed and quite rightly so fellow of BAFTA. Congratulations. Fellowship, amazing. We are going to open it up to audience questions in a bit, but I'm going to selfishly talk to Sandy through her wonderful career. And it's lovely to be in this room because
isn't it amazing?
It's absolutely phenomenal, the stories that these walls could tell. I want to go back, if you don't mind, because being a London girl, growing up in Brixton, and I was interested to whether you had ever thought about how important that was to what you ended up doing, how inspiring it was, how it formed any idea or journey of what you ended up doing, or did it?
How London inspired me?
Yeah, and Brixton, in particular, that area.
Guess, well, as a kid and as a young person, I took it for granted. Yeah. You know, I lived in London, which was the centre of the universe as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
And I suppose I didn't realise at the time how lucky I was. And because I lived in London, I had access to everything, you know, to museums and cinemas and theatres and stuff. So I suppose I was just lucky. But I didn't actually consider it at the time.
And where did that journey of recognition and admiration and appreciation of costume design come from? Was there a moment where, you know, you surrounded yourself with art and inspiration, and a lot of that was to do with theatre for you at the start? But where did that moment come from for you where you were like, this is the journey I want to make? Is there a point?
I'm not sure there was a point. Well, the actual costume design.
Yeah.
As opposed to just... I mean, I was always interested in art and creating things and making things.
Yeah.
And I was always interested in clothes just because I liked them. And I liked wearing them and I liked making them. And I made dolls' clothes and I made clothes for myself when I was young. Yeah. So there was always the clothes thing, but that was just what I liked doing. And I don't think I thought about it as a career until my teens, really. I went to art school to do a foundation course, and even when I started my foundation course, I didn't really know what I was going to do after that. And the idea of a foundation course is where you try a bit of everything, and then decide which way to go. But by that time, I was definitely into the theatre and film. And I mean, this is a story I've told lots before, but I mean, when I was about 16, 17, I saw Lindsay Kemp in the theatre. And Lindsay Kemp, for those who don't know, was an amazing choreographer, avant-garde performer who worked with David Bowie during his Ziggy Stardust era. And I only knew about Lindsay Kemp because I was a huge Bowie fan and read everything. You know, whatever was written, I'd read about it. And I heard about Lindsay Kemp, went to see him, and his shows were just extraordinary visual extravaganzas. And at that point, I thought I want to be part of this world, but I didn't know what I was going to do in it. So maybe that was a key moment, really.
And then how do you know, I imagine in this room we have young people who are aspiring that this is a career path that they want to take, this is a journey they want to take. When you see something like that and you see the inspiration and you go, yeah, this is a world I want to be part of, what then for you were the steps you took towards infiltrating that world, to getting that foot in the door, to showing what you were capable of?
Well, after foundation, I applied to do theatre design. You know, I learned how to make costumes and studied it a little bit, but I actually was a pretty bad student. I don't know, I really wasn't very good at being told what to do, which is terrible, really. But during that time, I was still going to the theatre and doing things. And what I personally did was I actually met Lindsay Kemp. I actually went to a dance class in order to meet him.
Yeah.
And just approached him and said, I really love your work. I really like what you do. Can I do something? Can I come and help? And that's what I did.
What was his response?
His response was... we ended up becoming friends. His response was like, let's go for a drink in the pub. And that's what we did for the rest of that summer, became friends. And then he said, yes, come and work with me. And I kind of took his word for it. Didn't go back to college at the end of my second year. And then a few months later, he did call me, and I was like flown out to Italy. And it just sounds really incredible. I mean, I was literally flown out to Italy to go and work on a show that he was doing.
Amazing.
And completely green, didn't know what the hell I was doing. But
it's the start of it, though.
Yeah.
Before we take that journey into the rest of that, we've got a beautiful piece of VT's we want to show, which is just a bit of a highlight of some of Sandy's extraordinary work. Oh, amazing. I think I could watch film montages all day. They're just so great. It makes you go.
That's a particular good one, isn't it?
Yeah. How does it make you feel? You know, that's a flash of just some of the work that you've done.
I know, it does. It makes me feel old, actually, because there's so much of it. That's so many years worth.
It's extraordinary, and it's hard to know where to start, because I think along the way what's been wonderful is the collaborators that you've worked with, you know, over the years. You know, you mentioned Lindsay there, and then, you know, kind of going chronologically through people like Derek Jarman, who was... Do you mind talking a little bit about that collaboration and that relationship and how important that was to you, particularly at that time in your career and really that platform?
Well, Derek was the first film director I worked with, and I kind of did pretty much the same thing as I did with Lindsay. I approached him and I invited him to come and see a piece of theatre I'd done at the ICA with a fringe theatre company called Rational Theatre back in the early 80s, where I did a lot of sort of small sort of theatre pieces.
Yeah.
In the days when there was money from the Arts Council to fund all these little theatre companies. And he came to see the show and, again, invited me to tea like Lindsay did, and then told me that if I was interested in film, a good place to start would be in music videos, this was in the early 80s. This must have been about 82, 83, something like that.
So what did you do?
And I did a whole bunch of music videos for a year. I mean, and with him, he directed those.
Yeah.
I mean, not all of them. Don't ask me who they were, because I completely forget, but I did do lots of them.
Yeah.
And then about a year after that, he talked about Caravaggio and me designing the costumes for Caravaggio.
Did you feel there was a massive difference from working on, you know, because so many music videos as well, they're short films really,
yes.
A lot of the time, of that jump from making almost a short film into a feature film. Did it feel like a big step for you?
I suppose because it was Derek and he worked in a very different way from subsequent directors. And I thought this was what filmmaking was like. And actually I realised later it wasn't. It was how Derek made films. It wasn't that much different from working in the theatre either.
Oh, wow.
And the way that he worked, where in the theatre, I mean, everybody mucks in and everybody does a bit of everything. And that happened in the same way in Derek's films. So there were scenic artists who would come and help make costumes once they'd finished painting the sets. Actors were ironing their own costumes. I mean, everybody did everything. So the music videos were a bit like that. I mean, we were used to staying up all night. I mean, you'd make things the night before that had to be used in the video, and then you'd stay up all night shooting. They went on for hours.
Yeah.
So working on a low-budget art house movie with Derek was pretty much just a natural continuation from that. When
you took that step into film, and that experience that you had through working in theatre, what did you feel like film gave you the opportunity to do as a storyteller through your work? Was it a different way of storytelling?
I hadn't thought about that. And when I was working in the theatre doing the small things, I was doing the sets as well as the costumes. And It was at the point where I thought I prefer costumes rather than sets, and I didn't want to have to think about sets, which is probably why I thought about going into film as opposed to bigger theatrical things.
Does that experience help you, though, in your work now, having that experience of set design?
I'm not sure. I enjoyed it at the time. I enjoyed making things, but I kind of would really... I mean, when I was at college, the classes I used to bunk off were like technical drawing, and I wasn't interested in all that side of it, so that's why I kind of didn't want to do that, production design. But the difference between designing costumes for film and theatre, I mean, it's the same. We're still working, you're still designing clothes for characters, you're still creating characters using clothes, so it's the same thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know why I enjoy film. Maybe I enjoy film because you get that you're thinking about a camera, you're thinking about things in close-up more than you're thinking designing for the back row in a theatre.
Detail.
But that's not to say that I don't like theatre. I do like theatre, and I would still do theatre. And in fact, I might be doing some theatre in the next couple of years.
And then from working with Derek, and then progressively starting to work with other directors. How did that happen? Is it people coming to you, like with Sally and then Neil Jordan? And
I have to think about that. I'm trying to think who was the next person after Derek Jarman, because I did a few years. I did about three or four things with Derek.
But like Orlando was like the scale of the costumes.
But I guess Orlando was the next biggest thing after that. No, I think I did a Neil Jordan film before Orlando even. Yes, I did. I did The Miracle in Ireland. That came before Orlando.
Very different to Orlando, though.
Very different to Orlando, and it was also working with another... And actually, I did Stormy Monday with Mike Figgis in the 80s. That probably was a But then again, I knew Mike Figgis from theatre days because he's ex-theatre. So again, it was working with a director who was used to working in theatre. But then that was a whole different ballgame. Working on something like that was different from a Derek Jarman film. Something with a more of a structured narrative, and storyline was different. But Orlando, but going back to Orlando was a little bit like a continuation of the Jarman days with Sally Potter.
What's day one on something like Orlando? Where does it start for you? You sent a script, and then what's that kind of journey to the point where it's the first day of filming?
Oh, goodness. It's the same with every. You get sent the script, you read the script, then you meet with the director. And that's the most important bit, is the meeting with the director, because that's when you find out what their aim is and what their vision is. Well, hopefully you find out what their vision is in that first meeting. You might not. Sometimes it takes several meetings before you actually can grasp what the director's vision is, depending on the director and how good they are at communicating that. But some directors are better than others,
I'm imagining.
And they have different ways of doing it. You know, Sally is a very visual director. I mean, she, again, came from theatre, interestingly. And maybe they are the directors that I enjoy working with, thinking about it. It's the ones who are really visual and can communicate visually and have that theatrical experience. There's an air of theatricality to everything they do. So she was very clear in what she wanted. She also had a lot of reference images. It's difficult remembering actually what happened. I mean, that is what happens. But then on Orlando, it was a bit like doing a Derek Jarman film where we had very little money, and I had a workroom set up, a tiny workroom set up, actually in, you know where it was? It was in Julie Christie's apartment in a warehouse building in Columbia Road, because Sally Potter lived there and had her offices there, and her next door neighbour was Julie Christie, who was out of town, and she let us use her apartment as a workspace.
Oh, wow,
and that was it.
And
we kind of lived there for probably 2 months, day and night, designing and, you know, making costumes.
Yeah, I love that story. I love as well what I think is something that kind of one of the threads through a lot of the work that you do is about how you kind of almost kick against historical accuracy to really tell a story through emotion and creativity. So, you know, with the period dramas or even films with set in certain periods, even something like The Departed as well, you know, where I just feel like through your costumes, you really do you kick against that kind of the accuracy to really try and tell stories through. I mean, I might be totally wrong here, but do you mind talking a little bit about that and about your approach?
I wouldn't say it's a deliberate kicking against. It depends again on the nature of the film, or whether it's a film that's set in a historical period but it's sort of slightly stylized. I mean, The Favourite, for instance, obviously is stylized, but that started with the script. Because the dialogue is not what you'd expect. And it's telling the story, and it's set in an actual time about real people, but it's heightened. I suppose what I do, I think it's entertainment, we're telling a story, so I kind of like to push it or heighten it. I don't deliberately go against the period. I mean, every project that's set in a period starts in the same way, with really detailed research. You know, so I learn what the period is, what it should be, what it's meant to look like. And a lot of the time I adhere to that. It just might be a slightly different in terms of, it might just be a texture or a colour or a kind of fabric that is used is not strictly accurate. And sometimes that's just, you have no choice in that, because you can't buy Elizabethan fabrics now, you know what I mean? Or even 1930s, even trying to replicate a 1930s dress, you can't get the same fabric, so you have to do something different. So just purely by doing that, you've kicked against, if you like, the actual... But I think, going back to my roots, and when I come from theatre and all the rest of it, I think there's always a slight air of theatricality to it. Maybe that's what it is.
But then when you are, you know, coming up with those initial ideas, there then is a whole journey of conversations with other collaborators, because, you know, it's got to work for the set, it's got to work for the light, and it's got to work for the aesthetic of the entire film. It's got to work for the actors as well. That in itself, it's not just a case of coming up with the ideas and that's where you go. There's a whole journey of that.
No, of course, you don't work in isolation at all. You have to work completely. You have to work with the production design department, and so as much as possible, you stay in touch with them on a daily basis. So that I like to see the locations, the set designs, the colours being used, the textures being used. And you work actually probably more closely with the set decorator than the production designer, because they're the people doing the set decoration. I mean, the things that you see inside a room, for instance, is all chosen by the set decorator. That is crucial to know the background of where your characters in the clothes are going to be. And also the cinematographers, and that way back, this is crazy, but I've only in recent years realised that I should be talking to cinematographers, or had the nerve to. When I started, they always seemed like really intimidating. The cinematographer was always way up there, like the most important person. And for a long time, I felt just as a costume designer, you were sort of like, you're just a costume designer, you can't talk to them. And I realised, of course, now...
Yeah, you've got a fellowship,
you have to,
you're up there.
No, and now I have arguments with cinematographers. Because quite often what can happen is you can do something, you can choose something colour-wise, tonally, and then the cinematographer has got an idea in their head of how they see the palette, and things can change. I mean, I've had times when I've made a costume that's a particular colour for a particular reason. It might suit that person. And then you see, if you're lucky enough to have had a camera test before we start shooting, you see the test, and sometimes it's once we've started shooting, and the colour can be completely changed.
Yeah.
And you think, what's happened there? And then the cinematographer will say, oh, but I warmed it up because it's nicer for the skin tones, or I warmed it up because it looked nice on that scene. I said, but that's not the blue I chose. And they'll go, but it was a nice blue. I go, no, that's not the blue I chose. And then you have this whole dialogue. And then if you're lucky, you reach a compromise and it can be fixed afterwards. But the cinematographer is absolutely one of the most crucial things. You have to know what they're going to do with the colour, simply because colour is probably the most important thing for me.
Yeah. Does colour come first then when you're reading a script?
Quite often. Quite often I get a feeling for the colour, either for a scene or for a character, but then that could change once I know who the actor is.
Oh, wow. What about for something like Carol?
For Carol.
Was that kind of colours first, in terms of... Because that's got a beautiful aesthetic to it. I mean, the costumes are pristine and beautiful, but they do they're part of the storytelling. Was that a kind of
really
clear
helps
colour
if you know who the actor is when you first start. Sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, usually there is a lead attached, which is how the money's been raised in the first place.
Yeah.
So normally you know one of the actors, but you might not know several of the others, and you've got to think about the costumes before you know who they are. And I kind of...
That's hard.
It's hard, and I try not to, because actually you can't. You might have an idea of how a character can look, or it might even be in the script how a character looks, or what build they are, or colouring, or whatever. But then they could be cast completely in the opposite direction. So I have to wait until I know who the actor is, and hopefully meet them face to face, before deciding which way to go. But in the case of Carol, we knew it was Kate and Rooney.
Yeah.
And I just knew what she had to. She had to be in those soft, expensive-looking colours, soft, sort of, sophisticated colours.
How much collaboration is there with the actors? In terms of do they get involved much with the costumes, or is it not a case of like put this on? But
totally depends on the actor. They're all different.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had some actors who just stand there and go, "This is your job. You just do what you like." On one hand, that sounds great, but on the other hand, I'd much rather have a conversation and a dialogue.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you don't know if you're going in the right direction, and it really helps if you've got somebody standing wearing something going, not sure about this.
Yeah.
Or, I love it, it's really great. Because that's how it happens. That's where the designing happens, actually.
Well, I guess as well, because they've done their own research, so they've got to embody this character. So by having input into what that character wears, they guess they feel it in a way.
Yeah. No, you absolutely have to take their opinion into consideration.
Whether you take
and hope that you agree with it, actually.
Can we talk a little bit about Scorsese? Because this is an extraordinary relationship that you have going back to Gangs in New York. How did that relationship start? Was it a call? Was it an email?
Yeah, it was via my agent. It was Martin Scorsese wants to send you a script. And it was, oh my God. And I got sent a script that was about that fat. Wow. It was impenetrable, actually. It took me a week to read it and understand it. It was really huge. And it was like, oh my God, this is massive. And then I was flown to New York to meet him. And he met me in the screening room in his office. Actually met in a little mini cinema.
Wow.
And I was terrified, actually. I was like really nervous about it. And I wondered why they'd asked me. But I mean, I think...
Did you ask him?
Huh?
Did you ask him?
Why? I can't remember. But I guess because the film was being made in Europe. And up until then, all his films had been in America, apart from, he'd had done some other ones outside America. But I mean, it was a European film, so I guess they were looking for a European design. And I had just won my first Academy Award, which probably had something to do with it. That probably helped.
Did he ask you what you thought of the script? I was kind of interested
I'm
what that
sure,
conversation
I
was.
wish I could remember the conversation. Do you know what? I was probably like, you don't really have to say much with Martin Scorsese because he does all the talking.
Great.
You know, which is actually is really good. And you're just like, and he must have asked what I thought of the script.
But it's interesting because, you know, he has his team around him. He has, you know, people like Thelma and things that have worked with him for years and stuff, and to be brought into that kind of...
No, it was incredible.
Collaborative. And what a film to start on with him as well.
It was huge. And it got bigger and bigger. As we were doing it, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And the script was being changed the whole time. I mean, it went massively over schedule. We were in Rome for a year.
Wow.
Not shooting for a year, but I mean, including pre-production, kind of ended up living in Rome for a year.
Give us a little bit of an insight into what it's like, something like that on set on a day, you know, in terms of what, you know, you're... And how... Because I love seeing all the wonderful sketches from the different productions that are there, and you know, and for Daniel Day-Lewis' character, those kind of different shades of that one outfit, for example, is just a beautiful thing to see. Where, you know, is that something that on the day you're having to tweak things, or talk us through what a day on a set of like something like Gangs of New York?
Such a big one to think about. I mean, I think, well, obviously, by the time you start shooting, you've got a basic look for each character. You haven't by any means got every single costume done by the first day of shooting, because you're doing that as you go along.
Yeah.
But by the time you start, you've got the basic look, the basic silhouette. And with Daniel Day-Lewis's costumes, I mean, it was, as you say, it was the same silhouette, the same shape, but just sort of variations on a theme.
Yeah.
But a day in the life of on set is a difficult. I mean, each day was different. I mean, let's say it's one of those days where there are hundreds of extras. Basically, people come in very, very early in the morning to start dressing the crowd. And then I will go in and then look at, you literally do a military lineup with the crowd. And this happens on any film where there's extras. They all line up, the men and the women. And I have to walk down and look at every single one and then make tweaks or changes, and everyone's standing to attention. It's a really weird thing to do, but it's how you check everybody.
Yeah.
And
what are you checking for? Sorry.
That they look good, because I mean, prior to that, the extras have been in for fittings, and that's sometimes weeks and weeks and weeks of fittings, where there's a team of people and there's a whole pile of clothes that have already been made. And I usually do the first one or two fittings, say, okay, this is the kind of look. Then you have people who are very good at that sort of thing. And what the people who fit crowd are doing, they're making characters. They're actually deciding on the characters as they go along and putting outfits together that work. And quite often what can happen, and what did happen at the beginning in Gangs, which was quite funny, was I would do a couple of samples, and then the people dressing would then come in and dress everybody else exactly the same, and it looked like a kind of chorus line. It looked like an opera chorus. They didn't all exactly the same. You have to go, no, not exactly the same. This is an idea. You have to do variations on a theme. Yeah. So when you're going down the line, you're sort of tweaking things so everybody doesn't look identical.
Yeah.
But after a while, I mean, what I have in my team, my regular team, I have people who I know who are good at that, and I don't have to. Yeah. I don't have to follow through all the way, because I have people that I know who can actually do it really well. But when you're working with people for the first time, it's difficult to communicate that.
Yeah.
So the first thing you do is you check the extras, and then by that time, the actors are all getting dressed and then coming out of hair and makeup, and then you go and visit each actor in their trailer and go and check that they're all happy and everything's in place. Go to the set and watch the first few takes.
Wow. I'd like to do that a lot. I love as well how throughout your career, you've done this great thing, and you know, so much of your early, you know, starting in independent theatre and cinema, really, but you managed to kind of balance these two things, where you throw your wonderful creativity to big films, but you also maintain that relationship with independent cinema as well. Why is that important for you?
Because I think the most interesting films are the small ones. The most interesting films that take the biggest risks are the ones with the least amount of money. Yeah. Because people who've got lots of money don't want to risk spending lots of money on somebody, on a filmmaker taking a risk. So I do think the most interesting films artistically are the smaller ones. So I like to keep doing those. I mean, of course, there are big films that are good as well. I mean, like Martin Scorsese says, he's a sort of like, big budget art house
I still think of him almost as a...
Yeah, he is.
He's still an independent filmmaker by heart,
Luckily,
even though he's got millions.
I mean, he is one of the big, huge, established directors who still take risks, I believe. So it's...
we're going to talk specifically about The Irishman and The Favourite in a second, but just before we do that, Living is the most recent project that we will all have sat and enjoyed. Wonderful Bill Nye and Amy Lou Wood as the kind of two leads in that. What was it about that production that made you want to work on it with Oliver?
Well, I was approached first by Stephen Woolley, who is a producer I've known since the 80s.
Carol,
and did really early things. I mean, even the Neil Jordan film, Crying Game. He produced the Neil. I met him, when we did the first Neil Jordan film in 1989, I think, which was The Miracle, and then The Crying Game in 91. I've known him for years. And this was one of the first films. This was an after lockdown film, so it was one of the first films happening again after the second lockdown, I believe. Sent me the script and said it was a remake of Akira, the Kurosawa film. So it was an interesting story. Mm-hmm. But then I met Oliver Hermanus, the director, and I really liked him. I thought he was really interesting. I thought it was a really interesting choice of director to do this quintessentially British film based on a Japanese story. Yeah. So that attracted me. It was sort of the familiarity of working with friends, who I've worked with a lot, and a new, exciting, younger director.
And also the talent on that as well. Someone like Bill, but then also someone, one of the most, I think, exciting kind of acting talents that we have at the minute, Amy Lou Wood, who's amazing. Mm. How exciting is that opportunity for you? And you kind of mixing those two worlds of new, fresh...
It's lovely, like Bill. I'd never worked with Bill before.
Really?
No. Strangely, yeah. Wow. I mean, he's one of those people you think, So it was my first time working with Bill, of course. It was charming and,
No one holds an umbrella quite like Bill Nye does.
But when I first read the script, interestingly, I'd thought, and they didn't tell me it had been cast. I read the script. I read the script actually about a year before the film happened. And I went to the meeting and I said, is this cast? I said, because I've got a really clear idea in my head of who it should be. And it was Bill. Amazing. I mean, it's actually written for Bill, I think. So you could actually see, you could completely see him. And didn't have to do that much with him because it was in my head. And it was a real joy to meet Amy Lou for the first time because she's just got an incredible energy. Mm. I mean, she really is. And her character in the film is the little ray of sunshine in the office. But that's what she is. That's what she brings.
It's interesting you talking earlier about that idea of kind of it took you a while to get to the point where you could feel like you could have conversations with the cinematographers and kind of fight your cause, fight your corner almost in a way. Do you find that kind of you, with new talent that you're working with coming through, do you see that in them and almost, I don't know, is there a kind of encouragement?
I don't know, actually. Yeah, in a way, I mean, I like the position I'm in right now, which is older. I mean, quite often I'm the oldest person on the set, in the crew.
Just Earth years, Sandy.
But I actually like that. Yeah. Because I now know that I know what I'm doing. I now feel confident that I know what I'm doing and I know, how things should work. So I now have the confidence to speak out about things. And I like working with the younger actors particularly.
That energy.
Because I enjoy their energy, but I also enjoy making them feel confident, helping make them. And Amy Lou has actually said that about in her fittings and everything. She was, she hasn't always felt comfortable. Yeah. And she was made to feel comfortable. So I like to be part of that. And I just enjoy the energy of the younger people, Oh,
it's lovely to hear. We're going to talk about, we've got some brilliant images as well. We're going to talk about The Favourite and The Irishman, which are just two really good examples of, in one. I mean, I think you're the only person who's been double nominated 3 times for Oscars. Yeah. Like, not one film, but 2 films up this year. That's an incredible achievement. And this is a good example of that in terms of that independent film and then the kind of bigger budget thing. Yeah. But also the spread of what's requested. So first of all, we've got this. De Niro is an older man.
Yeah.
There's a story behind the costume in this and what it's saying and how it's part of the story. Talk a little bit about this film, this character and this journey.
Well, this film, I mean, it spans several decades, and it actually starts when he's about 40, I think. Is it 30 or 40? I can't remember actually now. It's about 30, 40, so that, you know, he had to be visually effected to make it look younger. And then it ends up with him this age, which is actually older than Robert De Niro. He's in his 80s at this point. So I had to do costumes that went from the 50s right through to the 90s. This was him at the end in the old people's home. And this actually is my favourite costume in the film, which is like, it's the least glamorous, and he's got like track pants up to here and a shirt. And,
Harry high pants.
Yeah, and it's the most characterful costume. I just like, I think it's funny. I think it sort of sums everything up.
Big ring as well.
Yeah. And it's the opening of the film when the camera sort of tracks through the old people's home and ends up on him.
Was there much collaboration with
Oh my
Robert
goodness, yeah. I mean, he has over 100, he's fantastic actually, over 100 changes.
Wow.
And in order to fit that many clothes, we had to have fittings that went on for 3 or 4 hours. Now, an hour and a half is a long time. An hour and a half is usually about the amount of time that any actor can bear to have a fitting. It's exhausting, it is hard, and then they always get bored and want to go home. We were doing 4-hour fittings with Bob. And at the end of it, he'd go, okay, when are we having the next one? Incredible energy.
Amazing.
And the fittings are really boring. I mean, I have racks of clothes. Like, so if I was fitting the 1950s, I'd have racks and racks of like jackets, trousers, shirts. And in order to get to where you get, you just try lots of different versions on. Like these trousers, this shirt, this jacket. No, change the jacket, change the shirt. Blah, blah, blah. And it's really a laborious thing. And then you photograph each single one. And then quite often during that fitting, you realise there's one look that is the one. You know, that's the look we'll do, but then we can also have this one as the alternative. And that was hours and hours and hours of doing that.
And that's just one actor.
And that's just one actor, yeah.
Right, let's move on to the next image that we've got. Oh, I mean, brilliantly kind of, you know, side by side, slumped in a chair.
Yeah, I think they're both in wheelchairs,
but
actually.
The wonderful Olivia Colman and the phenomenal favourite. Yeah. What a film. But how important, the costumes were so important to so much of the storytelling in this film, I feel. Talk a little bit working with Giorgos on this and what, you know, from the script to then how you saw that, because this is a good example, I think, of kind of almost juxtaposition slightly, even though they are in period pieces.
Yeah.
There's a lot of detail in there. And I remember we spoke prior to about that when it came out, about the denim and stuff as well, in particular.
This film, well, obviously the script was a script, and I read the script, it's fantastic and very exciting.
Yeah.
This film didn't have much money, considering the kind of film it was and the scale it was. And we had very little prep time, extremely short prep time, and very little money. And it was like, how are we going to do this many costumes, and this period, this particular kind of costume in the time? And it's a strange period. It's 1708, which is a transitional period between like two different looks. Mm-hmm. And normally on a film where you've got extras in period, you go to the costume houses, you go to Angels and Cosprop and rent costumes to put on the extras. There was nothing in any of these places of this period. Or what there was looked like horrible old panto costumes. So I knew I had to make everything. Knew I didn't really have time to do it all, didn't really have the money to buy expensive fabrics. I mean, it's set in a court, and you couldn't afford to make the clothes how they would have been, or how you would normally do a big, lavish period drama. Mm. So decided to sort of strip back all the detail and make it simple. And Giorgos had lots of visual references. Oh, he is a visual director, and he had lots of beautiful images. And one of his images in particular struck me, and it was an image from Ingmar Bergman film. There's a room that's red, and everybody in the room is wearing white. And he said, somewhere in this film, I want everybody in white. And that just thought, I kept thinking of that, The other thing that inspired me to do what we did with the monochrome was the film called The Draftsman's Contract, which was a film in the 80s by Peter Greenaway, set in a very similar period a little bit earlier, where everybody was in black and white. And the costumes were exquisite. And then I remember going to an exhibition and seeing these costumes, and was absolutely shocked to see they were all made out of cotton. All the white costumes were made out of calico, which is like, you know, the cheapest white cotton. And all the black costumes are just black cotton drill. And that's all they were. And that stunned. I thought, I'm going to do that one day. You know, I kind of, it just was so, it was so striking and so stylized. So I pretty much nicked that idea along with, and then presented that to Giorgio. Says, well, you know, you wanted this white scene. Well, how about we do the whole thing black and white? And that's how we ended up with that. And then so which meant that my shopping time, my fabric shopping time was reduced because we were just looking specifically for black and white, and we could just buy sort of cottons and things in bulk, and it was cheaper, quicker. Didn't have to worry about dyeing fabrics and colours, and just had a sort of uniform look that worked for the court. And then with the servants in the court, I had to make those different. And then, I don't know why I thought of denim, just sort of workwear. It was basically workwear, and so I used contemporary workwear to make period correct clothing.
It's just such a rich image, that in itself. But collaborating with like Olivia as well, Rachel and Emma on this as well, and those three women particularly.
They were amazing, yeah. All really easy to work with.
Yeah, that's
really great to work with.
Because with Olivia's character in particular, that character for me, memories of watching that film was just how almost like uncomfortable she felt having to wear.
Yeah, she didn't want to. I mean, actually, I probably should have put in, I don't think I have, I should have put in a photograph here of her, because what she wears most of the film is a nightgown, her dressing gown. And that, I really wanted that, because she spends most of the time, she's depressed, she's miserable, she spends most of the time in her bedroom depressed, and you think, well, what do people do who are depressed? They don't bother getting dressed. Yeah. And so I suggested that she should be in the nightgown all of the time, and the dressing gown that was made out of a candlewick bedspread, actually. Wow. And that was her main costume. There's the Academy Museum in America are about to exhibit her court robe, her ceremonial robes, which is the really massive long cloak with ermine on it and all the rest of it. And they wanted to have that on display. And I kind of said, well, that's fine, but that's a really obvious costume to have. You know, just because it's the biggest costume in the favourite, they want to put that on display in the Academy Museum. I said, I think you should have the nightgown and dressing gown as well, because that's the character piece. Yeah,
exactly. Well, it's the two sides of it.
And have the two together. I think it's really important to have the two together. This is what she actually wore, and this is what she was made to wear, and what she's uncomfortable wearing.
This is a great example as well. I think, like, so many times I've come away from watching your films as well and going, I just like at least 3 or 4 of those pieces that those characters are wearing. And even in this, you know, they were period stuff, but Emma's wardrobe in it, you were just kind of like, I just like all of it. 'Cause it's so, even though it's period, there's always a contemporary kind of eye on it, I think, as well, in the way that you design. I hope you take that as a compliment.
Yeah, I'll take that as a compliment.
Right, next one. We've got a couple more images. Oh, this is great. Stephen Graham's character in this film, the most brilliant wardrobe. But there's purpose in it. There's purpose in that kind of the short two-piece, for example, isn't there?
Well, in the scene where he wears the shorts, it was deliberate. I mean, he's deliberately being disrespectful, and then there was the fight scene about it. It was just fun dressing these kind of characters, these colourful, and they are caricatures, and it's a sort of fine line between getting the character right and then going into caricature, and you have to sort of try not to go too cartoony on it.
And how involved is Scorsese in those conversations?
He sees every single costume. I mean, I photograph every fitting, and then he sees every single one, and then he sees every single character when they come onto the set. Every time somebody comes onto the set with a new costume, he goes up to them, and he does this really strange thing. He touches it. He actually always touches the cloth. He's really into clothes and textures.
Why does he touch it?
I don't know.
What did
I don't know.
It's a good luck thing, maybe. It's like I don't know.
It's an appreciation, I think. I don't know.
Oh, I want one of those. Yeah. What was his response to the kind of the Stephen Graham, the two-piece thing in particular? Because, you know, that's part of narrative, really. That's kind of
It was really important. Well, when I fitted Stephen for that, we had lots of different kinds of shorts, like different length shorts, different colour shorts, different sorts of shirts, and did the same thing. You just sort of try on every combination and see which one works. Yeah. And then the one that we ended up with was just the one that I think it made us all laugh or something. I can't remember. You know, it's really difficult. I can't remember. You just know that was the one. And then I show Scorsese, I might pick 3 or 4 favourites, or maybe not even as many as that. I might pick a couple that I like both of, and then we'll say to him, OK, which one? Yeah. And then get the response, use the initial response, and then that would be the one I use.
Make him feel like he's making the decisions.
Well, you do that. You have to do that. You have to do that with directors a lot.
Yeah.
And different directors you behave differently with. You have to learn how to treat each director.
How does that work when you're coming on for the first time working with someone like with Oliver, for example? You know, you've got this long-standing relationship with Martin and other directors you've worked with, but when it is that first project with someone new,
you have to test the water. You have to sort of you sort of show them things, and if they respond straight away, or if they question and say ask for something else, you do that. You have to be really clever. There are some directors where you know they have to feel like they've made the decision, and so you have a couple of things: one that you like, one that you don't quite, and you can work it so that they pick the right one. Because sometimes the way to do that is say you really like this one, so that they pick that one. But actually, you really like that one.
Oh, you're a really good people reader. I like that.
Well, that's part of the job. That is a huge part of the job. We have to do that with directors. You have to do that with the actors.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about this scene and collection of costumes.
I guess the reason I picked this picture against the other one, it's just like a group of men again. You know, it's like two completely sort of polar opposites group of guys. And both look completely ridiculous, don't they? I mean, they look as ridiculous as the last lot. It's quite funny.
Yeah, exactly. It's
like men posturing, you know, and dressed up. Yeah.
Just in different outfits. Yeah. Have you got not a favourite film that you've worked on, but one that you think back of it being the most rewarding or the most memorable for you, for good reasons?
That's really difficult. I mean, there are so many different ones. I suppose one that always gives me joy is Velvet Goldmine.
Yeah. Because it's so personal to you, I think.
It's personal to me. I had great fun doing it. It was hard. Had a ball making it. It was the first film with Todd Haynes. Yeah. But it's one of those ones where if you catch it on the TV and you see a bit of it, you can't. I always have to sit down and watch the rest of it. It's quite, want to watch more of it and then don't get tired of it.
Have you got a favourite outfit from that one?
No, I can't have. No, I can never pick a favourite outfit. Yeah.
All of them. Sandy, thank you for your time. It's been, I could chat to you for hours, and hopefully we get to do it again because there's so many other films that we could talk. Didn't even talk about Wonderstruck as well. And I wanted to talk to you about Wonderstruck. Thank you so much for your generous time this morning, for your wonderful questions and your energy in the room. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you. Sandy Powell, ladies and gentlemen.